This is part one of a two-part series, and this is the story of how a quiet group of immigrants came to own one of America's most familiar industries. Not through headlines, not through politics, and not through fame, but through roadside motels, long hours, and keys passed hand to hand. America, late 1960s. The interstate highway system is expanding at full speed, concrete veins stretching across the country, and with them, a very specific kind of building appears. Low, wide, neon lit, the roadside motel. These places were not glamorous. They weren't destinations. They were pauses, a night's rest between somewhere and somewhere else. And by the 1970s, many of them were already dying. Travel habits were changing. Air travel was growing. Big hotel chains were consolidating in cities, and the small, family-owned motels scattered along highways were being abandoned. Owners retired, properties decayed, banks didn't want them. To most Americans, these motels were relics of a fading era. But to a small number of new immigrants, they looked like opportunity. At the same time, thousands of miles away, another change was taking place. In India, particularly in the western state of Gujarat, families with a long tradition of trade and entrepreneurship were watching the world open up. The U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 had quietly removed racial quotas. For the first time, large numbers of Indians could legally immigrate to the United States. Many arrived with little money, few connections, and limited English. But they brought something else, a willingness to work endlessly for something that might not pay off for years. Their first businesses were modest, convenience stores, liquor stores, small retail. But then word spread. There was something unusual about motels. You could live on site. You didn't need to hire many employees. Your family could help. And if you were willing to work the front desk by day and fix plumbing by night, costs dropped dramatically. More importantly, motels were tangible. Land, buildings, rooms that could be cleaned and improved one by one. And many were cheap, very cheap. So they bought the motels no one else wanted. Properties with broken signs, low occupancy, bad reputations. They moved in, lived in the back office, put their children behind the counter after school. They cleaned, they repaired, they waited. There was no master plan, no organization, just imitation. One family succeeded, another followed. Knowledge passed quietly. How to negotiate with sellers, how to survive slow seasons, how to reinvest instead of spending. Banks often refused to lend, so they lent to each other. Community loans, handshake agreements, trust enforced by reputation. This wasn't venture capital. It was survival capital. By the late 1970s, something strange was happening. Drive across America, and you'd start noticing the same surname, Patel, on deeds, on business licenses, on motel signs. Not because it was a company, but because Patel is one of the most common surnames in Gujarat, and because ownership was clustering, quietly, relentlessly. This became known as the Patel Motel phenomenon, often mocked, rarely understood. What outsiders didn't see was that this wasn't monopoly, it was multiplication. Each motel paid for the next, each generation trained the next, and none of it was fast. By the 1980s, the motel landscape had changed. The properties these families had bought cheaply were now profitable. Highways were busier, road trips were back, and consistency mattered. That's when the hotel chains arrived. Brands like Days Inn, Super 8, Comfort Inn. They didn't want to own buildings. They wanted franchisees, people who would pay for the name, follow the rules, and absorb the risk. And Indian motel owners were ready. They already knew how to run lean, how to work non-stop, how to standardize operations. So they joined, one by one. This is where the industry quietly shifted. Hotels stopped being something corporations owned and became something corporations licensed. The brand on the sign and the owner behind the desk were no longer the same. And the people best prepared for this model were already there. By the 1990s, Indian Americans owned a massive share of economy and midscale hotels in the United States, not because they were invited, but because they stayed when others left. But this was still only the first generation. They had built stability, not power. That would come next, because their children were watching, growing up in lobbies, doing homework behind the counter, learning the business before they learned the language. And when they came of age, they didn't just inherit motels. They transformed the entire industry. That's where part 2 begins. How the second generation turned roadside survival into corporate scale. How they reshaped hotel chains themselves.